Hi, folks. Dr. Dave. Going to be talking about Chapter 10. So let's get that fired up. Chapter 10. All right. This is a chapter about the war on terrorism. And the war on terrorism is this idea that happened after 9/11 that we being the American society, need to wage war there, not allow it to come here. And that's pretty much the rationale behind our invasion of Iraq, Afghanistan, deviling into various countries around the world. All right, so there's some terms here that will help you. Counterterrorism, counteracting the threat by being proactive in addressing the threat and eliminating the terrorist environment. Try to make it so it's not as easy for somebody to launch an attack. Anti-terrorism is preventing the threat. Now, this could include targeted killings, to use the Israeli term, where they actually say that person's a threat to us and our society, and they will use assassinations against them. The global war on terrorism is the idea that I just mentioned, taking the war to whoever and wherever it may be. Now, you have traditional military options. Those are the ones that we see when the planes come in or whatever. But there are some alternative military options. The book discusses things like suppression of a group, covert operations, the use of special forces so that they can go in not as a huge army with, all the people behind them, but just selectively go in, or alternative military options. These are what we're really using in a lot of places around the world. Repression includes nonviolent covert action, intelligence, enhancing security, economic sanctions, a lot of things, trying to push the terrorist movement down. You can console them or have conciliatory actions. That's where diplomacy comes in, and social reform and concessions. You can have legalistic approaches, bringing in law enforcement, for example. And by the way, in America, the #1 group that stops the most terrorists are local law enforcement. Street cops, subway cops. They notice something and they kind of like, this is getting a little squirrely. Maybe we'll investigate. And that's how they end up stopping a lot of terrorist attacks. Using domestic laws, using international law. That's how you can bring people to justice. And sometimes, that might suppress some groups. Using military force, and we'll just start, the most deadly, military campaigns. Then you can use paramilitaries. These are people that you give guns to, and they go do the work for you. And you might have punitive and preemptive strikes. You want to punish people, punitive, or stop them before the fact. That is the definition of anti-terrorism. There can be assassinations, targeted killings that I mentioned recently. Drones. There are kamikaze drones that can carry a payload, land on somebody's roof, and blow up their house. That's a reality. Special forces, think of them as like a SWAT team, but they do some very specialized things. These are really very highly trained soldiers, and extremely, extremely dangerous folks. They can be successful sometimes, they can be not. It's hard to mount a campaign. We've had in the past the helicopters crash and all the soldiers are killed going to do a rescue. That's an example of the not. Sometimes you can use repressive measures through the intelligence functions of a country. You can infiltrate groups. You can give disinformation out. You can conduct cyber warfare. You can use surveillance technology. And then there's all the stuff that's not in the text. Signet, that's signals intelligence. Humanit, that's human intelligence. And the one that's not mentioned at all is open source. Now, for me, this is one of the areas that you could become a specialist in. Let's say you really understand the internet, you understand how to find information. You can find an awful lot about just about anything by going through newspapers and magazines and academic articles and when people do presentations to the public, etc. I'll give you one example. I was tasked with doing a red team. And a red team is when you act as the adversary and you have to figure out a tactic to attack a facility. My task was to evaluate the various tactics to attack a nuclear power plant. Okay, I know something about this, and I know a variety of tactics. People can come by the sea, they could crash a plane into it, they could do any number of things. So they gave me a half a dozen on a Friday night, and I had to do a report by Monday. Does that sound like one of your class assignments? Well, it wasn't. This was actually, I was paid for this. In those hours between Friday night and Monday, I had to write up these 5 scenarios that they wanted me to look at, but I wrote up a 6th one. I got pictures of the nuclear power plant from space. I looked at what the opposition in San Luis Obispo was talking about. The facility was up there, it's called Diablo Canyon. I looked at PG&E, representatives of the electric utility that talked about the facility. And I looked at a lot of different sources, all open, all available in the public. And I analyzed and I said, you know, these 5 scenarios that you laid out, there's really no threat. They've got good security to handle somebody, attacking by sea. A plane would be unreasonable given these reasons. You don't need to know those, I guess. But the one that they didn't think of was Santa Ana winds. And I said, what you could do is deliberately light a fire and then show up as firefighters pushing a bulldozer to try to put it out. And the security guys goes, how did you think of that? And I said, well, I grew up in California. I know what a Santa Ana is, just like you guys do. And it was surprising to them that somebody had thought of a scenario that would put a lot of explosives right next to their storage tanks. And they didn't like that. And I said, well, I used satellite photos from Google Earth and information from your own guys. And then I gave them all the citations. They did not like this at all. But when you become somebody who knows something about the subject, you start thinking differently. You think like a terrorist. And it was kind of a fun weekend. And they paid me money. So this gets to this next subject, which is target hardening, making it harder and harder for terrorists to get at certain targets. There's economic ways you can start, but this is really back and forth between certain theories in CRIM Okay, maybe you've heard of a theory in criminology where you harden the target and you have more capable guardians and so on. So that's it for this chapter. I want you to keep thinking about your other classes and how they could be used in information. Remember, we're going to be the anti-forces for a potential school violence situation. We're going to use the information here. That's where you're getting to on your final project. Thanks much.